The Complete American's Guide to Revolution. Let's get you in a shirt with your face on it. Ernesto Che Guevara, communist revolutionary and global t-shirt icon. Winning advice from the best thinkers, activists, and revolutionaries throughout history. Insider tips on how to organize online and offline to build your movement. Proven strategies that would help you identify who your enemies are and guide you in creating a better America. The Complete American's Guide to Revolution, First Edition, by S.B. Barrick. Contents. Part 1, Heroes Wanted, in which you become a revolutionary. Chapters. So, why revolt? Applying what really motivates you to politics. Chapter 2, Poly Who? The major political ideologies explained. Chapter 3, Follow the Money Trail. How the pros identify the bad guys. Chapter 4, Tales of Oppression, tracing the historic struggle for self-governance. Chapter 5, To Be or Not to Be Incorporated, a human look at dignity in the corporate age. Part 2, Strength in Numbers, forging a political base. Chapter 6, Who Are My Friends? What you need to know about building coalitions. Chapter 7, Your Own Backyard, the most important front line in your revolution. Chapter 8, Watching the Grass Grow, seeding grassroots success from the ground up. Chapter 9, Organic versus Bureaucratic, how to exploit democracy's greatest advantage. Part 3, Technology, the Great Equalizer. Chapter 10, What's an Internet's? Just what the World Wide Web can and cannot do for you. Chapter 11, Building and Promoting a Website. Get an online presence with $50 and an hour to kill. Chapter 12, Why Smaller is Better. The 5 strategic advantages you have over big media. Chapter 13, The Technocracy. Democratic technology versus autocratic technocrats. Chapter 14, Flash Politics. How to flash mob anyone in or out of office. Chapter 15, Hands-on Hacktivism, Denial of Service Attacks, and Other Aggressive Tactics. Part 4, Chess, Not Checkers, Outlining the Battlefield. Chapter 16, I Want World Peace. Now what? The Economics of War. Chapter 17, Saying Goodbye to Your MTV, Pop Culture, Propaganda, and the Real World. Chapter 18, From Iroquois to Iraqis, Catching Up to the Perpetual American Genocide. Chapter 19, Who Turned Off the Lights? The Age-Old Struggle for the Control of Credit. Chapter 20, It's Alive! A History of Corporations as Cancerous Entities. Chapter 21, So Who Are the Bad Guys? Identifying the Beneficiaries of Violent Systems. Chapter 22, Truth and Reconciliation, Establishing Justice by Reclaiming History. Chapter 23, Tactics and Strategies, What You've Got and What Will Be Thrown at You. Part 5, My Life's Work, Personalizing the Movement. Chapter 24, Proper Care and Feeding of Your Idealism, Maintaining Hope and Fighting Cynicism. Chapter 25, How to Save the World in 5 Minutes, Ignorance to Activism as Fast as Possible. Chapter 1, So Why Revolt? In this chapter, the best reasons to revolt, the future of revolution, the importance of love, why you can leave your guns at home, how you've already won. Congratulations, you've taken a big step. You've gone out and bought yourself a book on starting a revolution. And that is exactly what you will learn in the following pages. How to start a revolution. Just imagine the legacy you can leave as a historical revolutionary. A world free of war, free of taxation, free to cross borders unhindered, free to live in a stateless society, free to use drugs of choice for purposes of their choosing, and free to build public monuments to you. The world will owe you a great debt. Well, it may owe you a debt, or there's a very good chance that it may just ignore you. In many ways, this book hopes to both motivate you, let's get going, and wake you up. Whoa there, cowboy. Take it from a guy who knows. Revolution is no place for self-delusions. Spurring on an evolution of civilization is a lot of work and effort. Changing the world will require more than heart and more than courage. It will take all of you and leave nothing in reserve. But before I jot down your name in the history books, let's step back to ask a critical question. Just why do you want to start a revolution? Overhauling an entire society is a near impossible task. What's in it for you? What's your reason? To borrow a phrase from the Russian author Leo Tolstoy, conformists are all alike. Every reactionary rebels for his or her own reason. Is your reason on the list? I'm compelled by injustice. I want to leave my children a better world. I'd like to advance a personal cause. I feel I should do my part. I hope to achieve world peace. I'd like to end poverty. I want to be free. All of the above. I'm compelled by injustice. Some people revolt because they are driven by an innate sense of justice. These people must give a voice to the voiceless. They can't just stand by and watch as others are abused. They are the prescient that stood on their local street corners and protested worldwide against the Iraq invasion when America was whipped into a post-9/11 frenzy. A generation ago, they brought the Vietnam War to a screeching halt by catching bullets at Kent State University, occupying Berkeley's public park, People's Park, and bringing the reality of the human cost of war to a somnolent American public. For these people, doing what's morally right just comes naturally. They have no other choice. Are you familiar with the saying about liberty or death by a guy named Patrick Henry? Or how about Simón Bolívar, who 50 years later had liberated a half-dozen Latin American countries from Spanish colonial rule? These leaders, uncompromising in their pursuit of justice, have rightfully carved their place in revolutionary history. If heroes like these are your role models, then you're someone who's compelled to start a revolution. Gaining pragmatic victories may be your primary goal, but you live to defend the little guy and persecute the asshole. The revolutionary fights to promote justice. There were two reigns of terror, if we could but remember and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passions, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 1,000 persons, the other upon 100 million. But our shudders are all for the horrors of the momentary terror, so to speak, whereas what is the horror of swift death by the axe compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror that we have all been so diligently taught to shiver and mourn over. But all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror, which none of us has been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. Mark Twain, 1835 to 1910, American author, humorist, pacifist, and revolutionary. I want to leave my children a better world. having a child can be very fulfilling, and by the time they're grown up, you hope to have instilled in them some of the wisdom you've earned from life. Instead of worrying about whether their son or daughter will be successful, every parent wants the comfort of knowing that they've prepared their progeny for the wild world out there. So it only makes sense that some are reconsidering the world we are preparing to leave for our children. Not only do the sins of the father visit the son, but his son's son, and his son's son's son, and so forth until someone finally gets it right. A large measure of the pride and satisfaction of tackling today's social ills come from the relief of knowing that your children won't have to deal with the same issue. Think about it. Do you really want to fetter future generations to the chains of our bad policy decisions? 1 out of every 2 people is projected to get cancer in one form or another over the next generation. Do you think that humanity should wait until it's 2 out of every 3 or 3 out of every 4 before we start seriously addressing the carcinogens we are mindlessly dumping into our environment? Perhaps the condition of the world your children will inherit keeps you up at night. Perhaps it even keeps you from seriously considering raising a child in the first place. If so, translate this anxiety into a reason to revolt. The revolutionary fights for the sake of future generations. I'd like to advance a personal cause. Do you have a pet cause that is close to your heart? Do you wish the government would get out of your sex life, or drug life, or life in general? Can you boil your resentment down to the fact that you have to pay income taxes, a relatively modern U.S. invention, or that our politicians con us into these endless wars generation after generation, or that the world still doesn't know the truth about 9/11? A personal cause is not a great foundation for a revolution, but it can be a great source of inspiration. Bobby Seale co-founded the Black Panthers, a revolutionary community service organization, after living through the assassination of great leaders such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Kennedy brothers. But Bobby didn't start off by envisioning a national movement. He started by arguing with his college professor. When she would use the term Negroid, he'd insist that she also use the equally inflammatory Caucasoid. He participated in boycotts to demand the inclusion of African American and Native American studies in his college curriculum. Bobby took a stand in school and remained standing until he had created an organization whose social programs were so effective that the only way the government could undercut their success was to adopt the Black Panther initiatives as their own. Bobby Seale addressed what immediately bothered him and then expanded from there. You don't want to come waltzing onto the world stage as a tourist, picking up pet causes left and right. Take a minute to think about what really bothers you as an American. Think of a specific injustice, or perhaps an instance where you were made to feel like less of a person. How did you feel? Were you ashamed, frustrated, angry? Use this passion as fuel for your revolutionary ambitions. The revolutionary fights their own personal crusade. I feel I should do my part. Is there a part of you that feels guilty when you hear about the troubled state of the world? Do you sometimes wonder if there's more you could be doing to help? Maybe you feel guilty that you did not serve in the Middle East, even if you suspect that these wars have always been based on lies. I know I do. I never served overseas, but I've had to witness my army buddies and family members come back with strange rashes and stranger delusions. And those are the ones who come back, to say nothing of the Iraqis who suffered the genocidal obliteration of their country. I remember watching the second plane crash into the tower from an army rec room. I remember saying goodbye to my battle buddy shipping out to Germany. I remember my cousin enlisting only to be discharged within 2 years, 100% mentally disabled. I remind myself that there, but for the grace of God, went I. Everyone has a role to play in revolution, and many will come to the revolution not sure how they are going to contribute. But they know that now's the time to do something. They are tired of sitting on the sidelines of history. As people's historian Howard Zinn put it, you can't stay neutral on a moving train. As the movement grows, more people will join with the relief that they finally have an outlet for their idealism, their guilt, or even just their common sense. If you feel a need to do your part, there's a place for you in the revolution. The revolutionary fights to be on the right side of history. I hope to achieve world peace. Killing to achieve peace may seem as ridiculous to you as having sex to promote chastity. But since the dawn of civilization, unscrupulous leaders have used this very argument to defend their wars of aggression. Do you ask yourself when all the wars will end, if they even can end? Perhaps you wonder, as French statesman Georges Clemenceau did, whether war is an interlude during peace, or peace an interlude during war. America secured her first external colonies through one of these savage wars of peace over 100 years ago by way of the Spanish-American War, advising America to do good by her new subjects in the Philippines. Celebrity author of the day, Rudyard Kipling, prodded Americans to take up the white man's burden and improve the lives of your new-cut, sullen peoples, half devil and half child. The wings of the war eagle spread out over Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, and we haven't looked back since. A generation later, Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler published his infamous book, War is a Racket, detailing the profiteering he witnessed during his military career. In his day, Smedley was the most decorated Marine in Corps history, and he remains perhaps its most honest. 5 short years after he began a touring career as a full-time pacifist, and only 1 year after testifying before Congress regarding an industrial coup to overthrow the U.S. government, Smedley checked himself into a naval hospital. He died weeks later from what was believed to be cancer. The date was June 24, 1940. Less than a month before his 59th birthday. Pearl Harbor struck a year and a half later, and America was once again at war. For every Smedley Butler uncompromising in their moral conviction, there are countless more talking heads selling us moral convolutions. In the 2003 build-up to the invasion of Iraq, viewers of network news were 25 times more likely to see a pro-war propagandist on their television than an anti-war patriot. Don't be naive enough to think that against such odds, the rationality of peace can be its own advocate. War is always profitable for the few at the expense of the many. If we are ever to earn a meaningful peace on earth, the many are going to have to rise above the cultural static and go after the profiteers of war, the revolutionary fights to bring the warmongers to justice. The voice that would reach you, hunter, must speak in biblical tones, or in the poetry of Walt Whitman. You are primitive and modern, simple and complex. You are one part Washington and one part Nimrod. You are the United States, future invader of our native America, with its Indian blood, an America that still prays to Christ and still speaks Spanish. You are strong, proud model of your race. You are cultured and able. You oppose Tolstoy. You are an Alexander and Nebuchadnezzar, breaking horses and murdering tigers. You are a professor of energy, as the current lunatics say. You think that life is a fire, that progress is an eruption, that the future is wherever your bullet strikes. Nah. The United States is grand and powerful. Wherever it trembles, a profound shudder runs down the enormous backbone of the Andes. If it shouts, the sound is like a roar of a lion. And Hugo said to Grant, "The stars are yours." The dawning sun of the Argentine barely shines. The star of Chile is rising, a wealthy country, joining the cult of Mammon to the cult of Hercules, while liberty, lighting the path to easy conquest, raises her torch in New York. But our own America, which has had poets since the ancient times of Netzahualcoyotl, which preserved the footprint of the great Bacchus and learned the Panic alphabet once and consulted the stars, which also knew Atlantic, whose name cosmos ringing down to us, whose name comes down ringing down to us in Plato, and has lived since the earliest moment of its life in light, in fire, in fragrance, and in love. The America of Moctezuma and Atahualpa, the aromatic America of Columbus, the Catholic America, Spanish America, the America where noble Cuauhtémoc said, "I'm not in a bed of roses." Our America, trembling with hurricanes, trembling with love. O men of Saxon eyes and barbarous souls, our America lives and dreams and loves, and it is the daughter of the sun. Be careful. Long live Spanish America. 1,000 cubs of the Spanish lion are roaming free. Roosevelt, you must become, by God's own will, the deadly rifleman and the dreadful hunter before you can clutch us in your iron claws. And though you have everything, you are lacking one thing: God. Rubén Darío, 1867 to 1916, Nicaraguan poet, journalist, and father of Modernismo. I'd like to end poverty. Maybe you care about peace on earth, but for you ending poverty is a more immediate concern. Before you fight to eliminate hunger, make sure you first examine why it exists. Despite the fear-mongering of the modern-day Malthusians, the world remains a rich and spacious place. As John F. Kennedy once remarked with typical common sense, "Our problems are man-made, therefore they may be solved by man. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings." If the world's current population were crammed into Texas, you would have roughly the same density as New York City. And as a 2007 study from the University of Michigan Ann Arbor points out, even with the doubling of the human population in the past 50 years, more than enough food has been produced to meet the caloric requirements for all, if the food was distributed more equitably. The study goes on to prove how this food can be grown sustainably as well. Do you empathize with the withered faces that stare blankly at you from the television screen, advertising hunger in Haiti or Africa or some other dark corner of the world? Sadly, we suffer from the age-old problem of distribution, not scarcity. The world is not poor. It is corrupt. Funny enough, Rome, the classic empire to which the United States is often compared, struggled with these same issues. In the early days of the Republic, the brothers Gracchi, Tiberius, and Gaius tried to pass reform legislation that would have redistributed land in excess of the legal limit of 330 acres, from the powerful few to the impoverished many. Their naive idealism in trying to enforce a law that was already on the books cost them their lives. Tiberius was bludgeoned to death by the Roman Senate, his body thrown into the Tiber River along with 300 of his supporters. It was the first recorded political murder since the Republic's founding. A decade later, Gaius, following in the footsteps of his reformist brother, was hunted down when the Senate declared martial law. The word was out: Gaius' head for an equal weight of gold. It is said that a soldier scooped out his brains and filled the skull with lead before collecting the reward. This is the price that would-be social reformers continue to pay when they challenge the economic interests of the few in the name of fairness. A year before he was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. exclaimed that true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Martin's struggle for civil rights had matured into a struggle for human rights, leading him to ask hard questions like, who owns the oil? Who owns the iron ore? Why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that is 2/3 water? This isn't the benign Martin that dreamt in Technicolor, but a bloodhound on the trail of injustice. A year after these statements, Martin received the institutional response: a single bullet that pierced his right cheek, smashed his jaw, traveled his spinal cord, and finally lodged itself into his shoulder. Who owned that bullet? A 1999 wrongful death civil trial proved that it came from the U.S. government's covert state paramilitary. What was Martin's capital sin? Restating the wisdom of King Solomon, who in Proverbs 22:7 pointed out that the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. Ending poverty requires you to question the entire economic system. It is going to require you to use your brain, a brain that someone could put a price on. It is going to require you to have a backbone that might take a bullet. It is going to require you to take on corrupt government, a government that may try to kill you. This type of interrogation extends beyond charity and into the realm of revolution. You want to end poverty, the revolutionary fights to create an equitable economy. I want to be free. Do you believe that Do you believe that starting a revolution or joining a revolution in progress can be a path to freedom? My cousins shared this hope with millions of others. This is one of the reasons that they marched with me through downtown Los Angeles in May of 2006. Before becoming a part of that historic day of protest, they wrote a sign for their dad to put on the window of his business: closed for May Day. Having grown up in America, my family members speak and write perfect English. Having no social security numbers, they have never moved beyond the humble business or even out of their suburban Southern California neighborhood. They subsist in the shadows as second-class citizens, much like the Roman Empire's tiered citizenship or Hindu's caste system. When my cousin was in a car accident, it didn't matter he had insurance. He has no rights. So the police took his car. Cruising into LA that May morning, I did the driving and left the flag waving to them. 3 years out of the army, I had long since fallen out of love with the Star-Spangled Banner. From a young age, we are coerced into a cult of patriotism. Where else but in a cult do you make children recite a pledge of allegiance every single day? This is the day's first priority, so important that children are forced to stand as if they were young cadets and a military officer had just entered the room. They pledge allegiance not only to a nation, but also to its symbols, not only to a republic, but also to its religion, not to a federation of states each acting as laboratories of democracy, but to a indivisible nation state with liberty and justice for all. This loyalty oath was originally composed 6 years before the Spanish-American War, interestingly, by a Christian socialist, and formally adopted 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Originally, it was accompanied by the Bellamy Salute, a creepy zombie arm raise almost identical to the Nazi salute. They eventually decided to drop that part. What if patriotism was not forced on our youth, on us? Perhaps then countries would be judged by their merits and not propped up by coercion, and we would have had our revolution generations ago. Are we not all sleeper cells, programmed our entire lives for American conquest? How else do you explain our disregard for human life? American commanders state proudly that they don't count deaths that aren't wrapped in the red, white, and blue, and the American public acquiesces. What horrible human beings. What were we before we were inculcated to be good Americans and bad people? What are the freedoms that the idealist espouse? Freedom from taxes? Freedom from government meddling? The right to bear arms? To arm bears? To make a profit? What about the freedom to think critically? Your right to an unobstructed historical record? Your right to make up your own mind about America during your formative years without all of the propaganda? The state has taken over the responsibility of raising our children, and it not only has done a bad job, it has practiced criminal deception. What you youngsters are saying to America today, the same as you said a year ago, tomorrow, at this very campus, you were saying to America, "You're sick, mama." And all the old slimy degenerate freaks kept saying, "You're too young. You're not a doctor. How do you know America's sick?" Said, well, it goes way back. They left a medical record for mother, and the medical record, they wrote it so clear and so plain, you don't need no medical background to look at mother's health chart. The medical record is called the United States Constitution. And when you read the Constitution, it tells you what Mother America's supposed to act like, think like, talk like, and feel like when she's healthy. And from reading the Constitution and looking at Mother America, she's been sick for a long time. So the young folks is trying to get America to take the examination, going for the cure. The same guys that wrote our Constitution, which was her medical chart, also left us a prescription, which tells us how we're supposed to deal with Mother America. Y'all check out that prescription one day. It's a simple prescription. They didn't write it in Latin because they wanted everybody to understand what the medicine is. It's called the Declaration of Independence, and it's a simple prescription. It reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that when these rights are destroyed over long periods of time, it is your duty to destroy or abolish that government." Dick Gregory, born 1932, American comedian, activist, writer, and social critic. Part of the reason that I joined the military at the naive age of 18 was that I was denied my country's real military history. I was not familiar with the name of Smedley Butler or that of Randolph Bourne, who warned a century ago that war is the health of the state. I trusted my country and offered it my life pre-9/11 with a sincere belief that the few served to provide freedoms that many took for granted. I did not know that since childhood my country had robbed me of my most important freedom, access to enough facts to make up my own mind. James Madison once said that a popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. My country conned me into military service. I suspect I'm not the only one who has suffered this farce, this tragedy. If you value freedom, for whatever reason, side with men against systems, organic movements against hierarchies, and openness against obstruction. The true libertarian, anarchist of history, and scalpel to bureaucracy will always find a place in the revolution. After all, whom did those colonial revolutionaries dress up when they wanted to send a message to England by dumping British tea into the Boston Harbor? Anarchist Mohawk Indians. Recognize the game board of history. There's only one reason to label someone illegal: to make them a slave. The same corporate class that lays you off here in the U.S. dumps its products in Mexico, causing farmers to abandon their crops and flee north to feed their families. The same state that takes away your liberties here criminalizes the economic refugees it helps to create. George Bush Sr. writes NAFTA, and Bill Clinton knocks it out of the park. George Bush Jr. sells a Wall Street bailout on national TV, and Barack Obama hurries it through Congress, while they give you the freedom to pick between the two. All the while, the next generation of little zombies, sans Nazi salute, are indoctrinated, pledging unquestioning obedience. Do you love freedom? Then use your indomitable spirit to recognize who your enemy truly is and who your friends are. Lend your strength to those who still struggle under the yoke, whether physical, legal, or mental. The revolutionary fights for the freedom to think for themselves. They fight for the freedom of all mankind. All of the above. In summary, the revolutionary fights for many things: to promote justice, for the sake of the future generations, for their own personal crusade, to be on the right side of history, to bring warmongers to justice, to create an equitable economy, for the freedom to think for themselves, for the freedom of all mankind. Few revolutionaries have one single reason for starting a revolution. Most of us combine a personal need to revolt with a social cause worth fighting for. Why should you know what motivates you? Because your resolve is going to be tested. Your very life may be endangered. The revolutionary who is able to focus on what motivates them forges the armor they then wear into the arena of the public eye. In war, the one issue for you that can create Robert Frost's lump in the throat that begins the poem is war. The one issue for you that can create Robert Frost's lump in the throat that begins the poem. Have you been forced to shoot at children who are merely defending their country and come back from the Middle East scarred? Have you ever gone to bed hungry as a child yourself, wondering why your parents have to work so hard? Do you have hard-working family members without papers who are unappreciated and maltreated in our society? Does it upset you to acknowledge that we live in a world where good men are assassinated, while dictators like Pinochet or Sudarto are allowed to live out golden years in exile, receiving glowing obituaries when they finally do die from the likes of the Wall Street Journal? The revolutionary minister, William Sloane Coffin, once said that when you see uncaring people in high places, everyone should be mad as hell. Do the people currently in power care about anything other than their personal enrichment? Does this make you mad as hell? Because if not, perhaps revolution is not for you. Revolution is not for the tourist. You need to find a reason that brings color to your cheeks and gets your blood boiling. Before you inspire anyone else, first you have to inspire yourself. Strength of sincerity is strength of identity. Actively seek out what motivates you and use this as the engine of your revolution. The purposeful revolutionary becomes invincible, at least mentally. You're still going to want to protect those brains and spine. There is an ancient Chinese fable called The Foolish Old Man Who Removed the Mountains. It tells of an old man who lived in northern China long, long ago and was known as the Foolish Old Man of North Mountain. His house faced south, and beyond his doorway stood the two great peaks, Taiheng and Wangwu, obstructing the way. He called his sons, and hoe in hand, they began to dig up these mountains with great determination. Another graybeard, known as the Wise Old Man, saw them and said derisively, "How silly of you to do this! It is quite impossible for you to dig up those two huge mountains." The foolish old man replied, "When I die, my sons will carry on. When they die, they will be my grandsons, and then their sons and grandsons, and so on to infinity. High as they are, the mountains cannot grow any higher, and with every bit we dig, they will be that much lower. Why can't we clear them away?" Having refuted the wise old man's wrong view, he went on digging every day, unshaken in his conviction. God was moved by this, and he sent down two angels who carried the mountains away on their backs. Today, two big mountains lie like dead weight on the Chinese people. One is imperialism, the other is feudalism. The Chinese Communist Party has long made up its mind to dig them up. We must persevere and work unceasingly, and we too will touch God's heart. Our God is none other than the masses of the Chinese people. If they stand up and dig together with us, why can't these two mountains be cleared away? Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976, Chinese political philosopher, strategist, and revolutionary. Do people still revolt? Starting a revolution will take me too long. By the time I know enough, or am prepared to act, the time for popular revolt will have passed. It seems like every historical analysis puts major events in the rearview mirror in history painting over the present with a drab gray of uneventful denouement. Perhaps you wonder why anyone would attempt to start a revolution in the modern age. We have approached the end of history, the political scientist Francis Fukuyama scolds, and this was way back in 1992, no less. We are past revolution. My well-informed and revolutionary stated response to these herders of history? Not exactly. Straddling the pinnacle of civilization is not only confining, but also uncomfortable, as you can imagine sitting atop any pyramid would be. If you shrunk the earth to the size of a basketball, it would feel as smooth as glass to the touch. But what does this mean to someone living under the shadows of the Himalayas, or the Hollywood Hills for that matter? Perspective sets the parameters of discussion and of one's imagination. Don't be fooled into borrowing someone else's view of the world, especially when that person has a vested interest in your self-awareness. In an unjust world, self-awareness can be a weapon of mass destruction. South African anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko warned the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. What is the world in which you live? What is the reality you experience every day? Are you polishing planets like marbles, or do you suffer in the shadows of mountains? In the next section, we will explore how revolution is not only possible today, but in many ways already on the move. Laziness lulls and spring. Have you ever voted in your life? I am 30 years old, and I haven't. There, I admitted it. We live in the most powerful nation on the planet, making us potentially the most powerful citizens in the world. Yet people don't vote. Why do 30 to 60% of citizens consistently decide that voting does not matter? In short answer, because individually it doesn't. Why have I never voted in my life? Because I have never been properly organized. I distrust the party machines that shout for my attention every election cycle. Odds are you distrust them too. These institutions are created to escort a voter from first political blush to the ballot box. They indoctrinate you to believe that your only option is a blue or red political chaperone, the donkey, or the elephant. Those of us who have a reservation are excluded as wallflower independents, which translates into potential donkeys or elephants. The richest 1%, on the other hand, flaunt royal purple and double down on both sides of the animal aisles. Don't let the media fool you. Apathy is not laziness. It is a vote of no confidence for a political system that we suspect is run by cronies who are putting their own interests before that of the public. But around the world, and now here in America, people are starting to organize themselves outside of political parties. Heck, they're outside of political systems, outside in general, camping out in public places across the world. The masses are starting to dance to their own music. The chaperones be damned. But before we get into the political lambada that's going down worldwide, first let us address the issue of non-confidence. If you are to lead a revolution, you have to understand what makes voters not participate. After all, you are eventually going to have to bring them back to the table with real alternatives, or else it will just be an extended picnic. Apathy as protest. If you are perfectly honest, you'll admit that laziness is one of the major reasons that people don't go to the polls. As I'll discuss in part 2, strength in numbers, however, your job is not to judge people, not even your lazy author. But no matter how much one would like to blame a slothful John Q. public, failure also perpetuates apathy. Our political system is failing us. Perhaps those who abstain from politics agree with Charles Bukowski, who, when he said that in a democracy you vote first and take orders later, while in a dictatorship you don't waste your time voting. Coming from a glasshouse democracy of poverty and perpetual war, it's a hard statement to throw stones at. Some of the smartest people I've known refuse to vote because our political system disgusts them. In 1950, a Swiss patent clerk who achieved fame in other fields noted that we should strive to do things in Gandhi's spirit, not to use violence for fighting for our cause, but by non-participation of anything you believe is evil. The question then is, are politics evil? To put it another way, in any given election year, are people rallied to vote for or against candidates? Your guy might be tepid, but that other candidate is a nutcase slash fascist slash socialist slash insert pejorative here. American comedian W.C. Fields captured the spirit when he remarked, "Hell, I never vote for anybody. I always vote against." Don't allow yourself to be herded into the prearranged political pens. As the political strategists say, frame the issue and you win the debate. As the Boy Scouts train, if you've lost your way, the best thing to do is to stay in one place. As research has proven, a man in an Arctic whiteout will eventually favor one foot over the other. Not having any environmental markers to orient himself, he will walk in circles forever, thinking he's getting somewhere. A funny thing about that guy, he can walk in circles to the left as easy as to the right. Non-participation is perfectly ethical and rational response from citizens lost, in this case, within a greenout of corporate-funded narratives. The absence of voter participation in America is a testimony to the state of its democracy. Don't let anyone manipulate you into feeling guilty about not participating in a system you neither have faith in nor control over. And don't lose sleep over the apathy of others. Misanthropy is not a helpful revolutionary trait. Trust that there is a wisdom to the sleeping giant. People act when inspired and follow those who inspire them. This is why we need a revolution in the first place, because politics as usual are broken. Act from your heart to forge something sincere and watch America get up off the couch. Give them something to believe in with which to orient themselves, and you'll be able to lead them out of that wilderness. And that Swiss patent clerk, Albert Einstein. The online resistance. Perhaps you've noticed that people are getting up off the couch all right, if only to sit right back down behind computer screens. Yes, internet activism is alive and well. One of the remarkable things about the past few years is that the internet is returning to one of mankind's earliest lessons, collectivism. The principles of cooperation, communication, and the common good reign supreme among the netizens of the world, and this electronic collective conscience does not take subjugation lightly. There are online resistance coding up a digital revolution in defiance of oppressive systems, and they are waiting for the world to catch up. Don't worry, we are going to devote an entire section of this book to discussing what the electronic frontier means to the revolution. For now, below is a brief timeline of American internet activism. 1990, in what's considered the first online protest, 30,000 people organized to opt out of a controversial consumer listing. 1998, two entrepreneurs create a digital petition to censure Clinton and move on to other issues. MoveOn.org is born. 1999, 50,000 activists organize WTO protests in Seattle. The Independent Media Center alternative news source is created. 2006, 40,000 high school students across California organize walkouts in opposition to changes in U.S. immigration law. 2010, WikiLeaks posts an online video showing a U.S. helicopter gunning down civilians. Later, the site releases 400,000 documents, the Iraq War logs. 2011, taking a cue from Arab Spring protests in the Middle East, protesters occupy Wall Street, garnering online support. Bill Gates once derided open source advocates as new modern-day sort of communists. Now they are bringing their distributed architecture guns to the table. As of this writing, WikiLeaks source Bradley Manning may still be in military prison, but the anonymous collection, philosophy, of internet hacktivists remains at large. The natural marriage of internets and idealism has created what has been termed the Streisand effect, named after the eponymous entertainer whose efforts to suppress online photos of her Malibu mansion only generated further interest. It is the electronic equivalent of gasoline for the fires of activism. When the government tries to shut down WikiLeaks, it only succeeded in multiplying their mirror sites 1,000-fold. They generated enough publicity for hundreds of thousands of dollars of fundraising. That is what has the establishment running scared. You can't outgun populism on its home turf. The internet belongs to the people. In a society that values the hoarding of information so much that it patents plants, cures for diseases, and even ideas, while selling college education for tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, the open source model is revolutionary. Bureaucracies seek out and retain power, while innovation abhors closed systems. The United States has 1,000 plus military bases suffocating the world. Do you think they want civilian oversight? There is a privately owned central bank in nearly every developed country in the world. Do you think they want the serfs to audit the books? If we are to innovate our democracy and revolutionize America, we are going to do it using an open source model. The dark shadows and secrets of our opaque society demand sunlight. So when the U.S. Senator David Rockefeller is captured on C-SPAN describing the ungovernability of the internet as a fearsome, awesome problem, pondering aloud whether it should have even been invented, as a revolutionary, now you understand his concern. This concern stems from the antithesis to democracy, a historical pathology that links freedom to chaos and benevolence to violent rule. That is a past that mankind has escaped, is still in the process of escaping. The bastard internet makes people who cling to this past feel really, really uncomfortable. To have a successful revolution, you will have to embrace the democratic potency of the digital age. You will not only have to surf the net, but stay abreast of an organic, anarchic swelling of online activism. Do so with humility, for as any surfer or 4chan frequenter will advise you, forces of nature cannot be tamed. To be continued.